Your grade is AC. The words didn't just land, they lingered. For a moment, the classroom kept moving like nothing had happened. Papers shuffled. Chairs creaked. Someone laughed quietly in the back. But for Aisha Carter, everything slowed down in a way that felt almost unreal. Because just a week earlier, that same paper had been called one of the strongest submissions in the class. She remembered it clearly. Not just the words, but the tone behind them. The certainty. The confidence in the feedback. It wasn't vague. It wasn't hesitant. It was clear. So how does something go from exceptional to average overnight? Aisha Carter wasn't the type of student who left things to chance. She was quiet, focused, and consistent. The kind of student who didn't cut corners, even when no one was watching. The kind who stayed up late, not because she had to, but because she wanted to be sure everything made sense. Every sentence, every paragraph, every detail. She didn't just complete assignments. She built them. Carefully, patiently, intentionally. And yet, here it was. A single letter sitting at the top of the page. See, at first, she assumed it had to be a mistake. That was the only explanation that made sense. Maybe something was missing. Maybe she misunderstood part of the instructions. Maybe there was feedback she hadn't seen yet. Because the alternative didn't fit. She looked down at the paper again, this time slower. More deliberate. Red ink circled at the top. A few short comments in the margins. But nothing detailed. Nothing specific. Nothing that explained how the same work that had once been praised now fell short. And that's when the first question settled in. Not panic. Not frustration. Just confusion. Because nothing about it added up. After class, she approached Mrs. Reynolds. Calm. Respectful. Measured. Can you help me understand where I lost points? For a brief second, it felt like a normal moment. A normal question. But the response that followed didn't match that expectation. Mrs. Reynolds barely looked up. I don't have time to go over every mistake. That was it. No explanation. No clarification. No offer to revisit it later. Just a response that closed the conversation immediately. Aisha stood there for a moment, then nodded slightly and walked away. But something had already changed. Because she wasn't asking for a better grade. She was asking for an answer. And instead of clarity, she got silence. That night, Aisha sat at her desk with her laptop open in front of her. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder. She didn't open the document to fix anything. She opened it to understand. She pulled up her previous drafts. Then the earlier feedback Mrs. Reynolds had given before the final submission. And almost immediately something stood out. The tone was different. Not slightly. Completely. Before, the comments had been specific and encouraging. Strong argument. Well-structured. This is excellent work. Clear. Direct. Confident. But now, it needs improvement. Lacks depth. Unclear. Short. Detached. Almost like they didn't belong to the same assignment. Aisha read them again. Then again. Same work. Different judgment. And that's when confusion turned into something else. Not certainty. Not yet. But suspicion. Because it wasn't just what had changed. It was how much had changed. She leaned back slightly, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. If the work had improved, why had the grade dropped? That question didn't leave. It stayed. Quiet. Persistent. So she made a decision. Not to argue. Not to confront. But to document. Aisha opened a new email. She kept her tone calm and respectful. She attached both versions of the feedback. Highlighted the differences. Placed them side by side. No accusations. No assumptions. Just what was there. And at the end of the message, one simple question. Can you help me understand what changed? She paused for a moment, then clicked send. The next day, everything looked normal. Mrs. Reynolds taught the class the same way she always did. The lesson moved forward. Students took notes. Nothing in her behavior suggested that anything had happened. Aisha checked her inbox. Nothing. Later that day, still nothing. She sat through class, writing notes, but her attention kept drifting. Had the email been read? Ignored? Or was something happening behind the scenes that she couldn't see yet? Around her, a few classmates whispered quietly. Not about the full situation, but enough to notice something felt different. At the front of the room, Mrs. Reynolds remained composed. Calm. Controlled. Unbothered. And that contrast made the silence heavier. Because if this was simple, it would have been addressed. If it was a mistake, it could have been corrected. But this didn't feel simple. Hours passed, then a full day. No response. By the second day, the silence finally broke. But not in the way Aisha expected. The email didn't come from Mrs. Reynolds. It came from the school administration. For a moment, Aisha just stared at the screen. Her email hadn't stayed where she sent it. It had been forwarded, reviewed, seen. They had gone through what she sent, and they wanted to meet. Soon. When Aisha walked into the office, her documents were already there. Printed, organized, placed side by side. The earlier feedback, the final comments. And for the first time, someone else was seeing exactly what she had seen. The difference was clear. Not subtle, not debatable. Clear. This wasn't about interpretation anymore. It was about inconsistency. Mrs. Reynolds was called in. And this time, the conversation was different. Questions were asked. Direct ones. About the grading. About the change. About the reasoning behind it. And now, answers were expected. The tone had shifted. Because this wasn't a student asking anymore. This was a review. And as the discussion continued, one thing became harder to ignore. The gap between those two evaluations didn't have a simple explanation. It pointed to something more. Something that couldn't be easily dismissed. And in that moment, everything changed. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about a grade anymore. A few days later, the decision came. Aisha's grade was reviewed, reassessed, corrected. The explanation was brief, but clear. The original grade did not reflect the quality of her work. There was no long apology, no detailed breakdown, just a correction. And sometimes, that says enough. As for Mrs. Reynolds, nothing was announced publicly. But the shift was there. Subtle, noticeable, understood. Aisha didn't celebrate. Because this was never about proving something. It was about asking a question and refusing to ignore it. Because it would have been easier to stay quiet, to accept it, to move on. But she didn't. She looked closer. She documented it. She spoke up. And that made the difference. Because fairness doesn't always happen on its own. Sometimes it has to be questioned. So what do you think? Was this intentional or just a mistake? What would you have done in Aisha's situation? Have you ever experienced something like this? And if you think this story is shocking, wait until you hear what happened in the next one.